This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus. It's episode 775. This week we present another in our Life and Times shows with Ed Light. And we're calling this the Life and Times of an IH Practicalist. Ed has had a fascinating career from his early years at the West Virginia Department of Health IAQ program to his founding of Building Dynamics LLC, which he's now retired from. He has always stressed the importance of hands-on, in the trenches people, following the science and being practical. Before we get started, let's thank our sponsors. They're the reason we can continue doing the show. And don't forget, after the show, we continue the conversation on afterthoughts.iaqradio.com. IAQ Radio Association sponsors are the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification, IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry at iicrc.org. The Restoration Industry Association, RIA, at restorationindustry.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA, at EIA-USA.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are Particles Plus at particlesplus.com. Tramex Meters at tramexmeters.com. EMSL Analytical Inc. at emsl.com. Should be hearing trivia music here.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick at cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry to report that no one correctly identified chemophobia as the term defining an aversion to or prejudice against chemicals or chemistry. Here's this week's IAQ Radio Trivia question. Name the research arm of the United States administration that is responsible for worker safety. Back to you, Joe.
Okay, Ed Light is the founder, now retired, of Building Dynamics LLC. They're an industrial hygiene and mechanical engineering consultants specializing in indoor environmental quality, HVAC engineering, and energy conservation. His areas of expertise include resolution of mold and moisture issues, COVID transmission in buildings, investigation of indoor environmental quality, HVAC operations and maintenance, construction, and water damage restoration projects. I also wanted to add, Ed is a senior fellow of the American Industrial Hygiene Association and well known in the industrial hygiene world. Great to have you back, Ed. Always a pleasure.
Howdy.
Hey, Ed. Now, what I left out of your bio is you're a musician, and one heck of an interesting musician. You going to play us a little intro song?
Sure. And no, I've always said that's my real profession, and scientist was just my day job. But here goes. Here comes Cyrus, the virus. You better watch your tail. Yeah, Cyrus, the virus. They all began to wail. Cyrus, the virus. Don't you feel a little sick? Cyrus, the virus. I'm getting out right quick. My hiccups turned to coughing, shaking in my knees. I felt like some old dish rag, and then began to sneeze. Achoo, my old lady's got the COVID, her iguana's got the gout. When those two get together, you should see them twist and shout. Cyrus, the virus, you better watch your tail. Yeah, Cyrus, the virus. They all began to wail. Cyrus, the virus, don't you feel a little sick? Cyrus, the virus. I'm getting out right quick.
And it's always a pleasure. Well done. Well done. Hey, Ed, let's start with your days back at the West Virginia Department of Health IAQ program. This is in the early 80s, before people even knew what IAQ stands for. And I'm wondering what got you started there? What was the catalyst for your getting that job, and what toxin were you chasing back then?
Well, to start with, I was an environmental scientist working for environmental groups. I knew nothing about industrial hygiene or indoor air quality. And so the way I got the job was I had a very good reputation with the West Virginia Air Pollution Control Commission, where I had often prepared and presented testimony on air pollution issues. And so then the state health department got an opening for industrial hygienist whose job it was to do the OSHA safety assistance program. And I was at a career path there. I was either going to be a coal mining environmental inspector, and then said, well, working for the state, industrial hygiene, that sounds kind of interesting. So I took that job, and then immediately the OSHA assistance program got transferred to our labor department, and they didn't know what to do with me, but I showed up to work, and there was a pile of complaint letters on my desk from folks living in mobile homes that were getting sick, and nobody had any idea what it was or what to do about it. So I dug into that, and so and then we went on from there to do a very successful figuring out of the formaldehyde problem. We actually helped push toward the resolution of that. We dealt with other public health, real environmental health issues dealing with IAQ at the time. Heavy-duty termiticides like chlordane were in real big use. So I partnered with our agriculture departments on misuse investigations, carbon monoxide problems, and then the term sick building syndrome started getting, this is before Facebook, but it started becoming known. And so we had a series of building attributed symptoms around the state. I worked very closely with our county health departments, medical officers, and most importantly, our facility departments with our county schools. And I was actually responsible for all our state buildings, environmental stuff. And so we dug into those problems, and generally we were well ahead of the federal government. We partnered with a few other states that were actually recognizing and doing IAQ problems, and with the few scientists and university people who were like real pioneers of IAQ. And now, see, 45 years later, I'm the IAQ guy.
Now, what's interesting to me, Ed, is that you went through a litany of issues and never once mentioned the A word, which became the issue.
No, I'm trying to forget about that. Actually, no, this was actually the most important. So asbestos. We were 1982, right? So asbestos had just very recently been recognized as a potential building issue. If you go back to the science and understanding of this, I mean, asbestos has long been known in occupational, giving people cancer and stuff. So EPA was just getting started with recognizing asbestos. So we had no funding or real basis for this, but I started our asbestos program based on existing resources at the state and county level, and most importantly, partnering with facilities people. And we actually, on a voluntary basis and technical assistance, got a real good asbestos program of identifying materials that could pose a problem, assessing them and finding that generally in place they were not a hazard, had to be managed, and we had to be careful of maintenance and renovation. And we got a training program going for contractors and facility people that had to work with asbestos. And things were going great till EPA said, we're going to fund the states. And they gave us almost $1 million for me to hire a staff. With the catch is I had to follow their rules, which we sort of did on the big school enforcement program and all this. And so that was really, in my opinion, was a downgrading of our effectiveness. But
why is that? Because it became too much focus.
Okay.
Can you repeat what you said, Ed? Why was it a problem? Joe's question.
Why was asbestos?
No. What?
No, EPA federal approach to this. And primarily of ivory tower people were out in the field, and various just their overall approach of enforcement, rigid rules, and not really understanding building facility management and actual public health. The program was quite different than ours, and we did our best to kind of keep going. And so,
well, let me ask you this, Ed. Was it overkill?
Oh no! Here was a critical thing. So EPA stepped in, was scaring the hell out of people that asbestos had to be removed. It was threatening your children. It was a tremendous health hazard. And in all the investigations, work I did with my schools and my state buildings, almost all the time, no hazard management in place. And I think there's only 2 or 3 buildings that represented such a damage and exposure hazard that we actually had to, short term, we had to shut those down and get them cleaned up and managed right. But that was maybe 3 buildings out of several hundred I looked at. And meanwhile, the whole school program in AIHA and the enforcement of that just developed around paperwork enforcement and the public panicking. We got to remove this asbestos. And
yeah. Why did you decide to leave that private sector job and co-found Building Dynamics? What kind of gap were you trying to fill there, Ed?
Well, actually, I'd take one step before that. The reason I left my state health department job was, I did all this work. I was working directly for the governor, heads of agencies, doing all this stuff, and I was on the lowest pay grade of anybody. And I could barely support my family. And then I found myself in the enforcement AIHA role of, so all our school districts had to prepare asbestos plans. So the consultants went up there and just got all kinds of work, sold their supposed expertise plans, and there was one consultant that had the majority of our school districts. I kept failing their plans and said, look, you got to understand this building and do it. So they came to me and said, man, we got a huge, great job for you. We're going to pay you so much more in our Washington, D.C. office. And so to support my family, I had to leave West Virginia and my public, my government work. And then I worked several years for big engineering consulting companies. And they were starting to have IAQ groups within those offices, and of course they put me there. And boy, I was very frustrated working with them. I mean, the approach they took to buildings IQ is very superficial, and the overall objective is just make as much money as you can. And so that's what I
And that's never been
went
your
on to
thing,
work for
Ed.
my own business.
Yeah, that's making as much money as you can was never your thing, huh?
Well, no, here I am retired, and for a lot of reasons, can barely afford to be retired, but I'm happy as a clam. I'm
And
fine.
you're playing music. That's what counts.
That's
Cliff,
a
let me
good.
turn it over to you, buddy.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Well, you've inspected the White House, and it's probably the most famous house in the world. What were the issues there? What did you find, and what were your recommendations?
So this was pretty interesting, and one aspect was pretty funny. So I was consulting for the U.S. Public Health Service, and so a big part of what we did was for GSA federal buildings, and we really had all kinds of issues. We had good investigations, and then they got complaints from the West Wing White House staff. They were attributing symptoms to the building. So that's how I went in there, and this was a unique situation where the initial and almost the most important part of the IQ investigation is to talk to the occupants, and they wouldn't talk to me. No, they were too important. They didn't, and so I went ahead and did a general assessment. It was probably the best operated and maintained, at least government building. I mean, I couldn't find any problems with it, and so really my recommendations and findings were virtually nothing. I tried to be polite about it, but one thing was really interesting. So this coincided with the exact period of the Clinton Lewinsky scandal. So my joke is, I was inspecting under all those desks, but I didn't catch it. We don't want to go into that. But that was one of the least important investigations I did, but it kind of. So my joke is I looked at the building with the hottest air on earth, the White House, and the coldest air, because went on to consult for the National Science Foundation at the South Pole, which was really interesting looking at their buildings.
Tell us a little more about what you did on the South Pole, Ed.
Okay, so the impetus for that was this is a scientific research station. They had a bunch of buildings there. They were really aging out. They had to be replaced. And so they had me look at the performance and conditions in those buildings related to IAQ. So big study was we evaluated ventilation in the buildings, and that was one of the few investigations I did where actually measuring VOCs was important because of the extreme conditions, workplace and building conditions there.
Yeah, I would imagine they don't want much ventilation because it brings in so much cold air.
Well, yeah, and there's a trade-off, and IQ is always trade-offs. You have to appreciate all the competing things and come up with something that is the best compromise. In public health, you don't want to make people sick, but you got to balance these things out. And also, sanitation was important, and we did an overall evaluation, and so my partner Jim Bailey, who's was a PE mechanical engineer, and unfortunately they didn't have room in the Army James Way tent for both of us, so I ended up going. But we gave them good engineering analysis of the ventilation and the IQ, and they could factor those in. Now they have new buildings at the South Pole, and and so we had input into that.
And
And
why were
also,
there VOC such an issue there?
oh my goodness, so everybody was totally bathed in JP8 jet fuel. I mean that
Uh,
powered everything, and there's no ventilation. And the worst place was the big equipment garage. They had to, maintain all that equipment. There was no ventilation in there, and we were trying to get levels, and I couldn't even see my meat. I mean, I don't usually get irritative symptoms, and and you can only take, I think, a 1 minute shower per week, and everybody was just emanating jet fuel. And so this affected IAQ in all the buildings. We assessed that. And one of the interesting things about the South Pole, you can imagine the kind of people who work there. A bunch of characters, and none of them complained about IAQ. That was the least of their concerns. And so then the conditions in the building and the environment were so unique. I ended up doing 3 scientific papers on buildings in that climate, and so
Very interesting.
that was a great adventure of my life. That was really good.
Well, you were also heavily involved in building assessments following 9/11. Looking back, what lessons did the industrial hygiene community and the restoration industry learn after 9/11?
So our involvement was we became consultant to the U.S. Justice Department, and actually I was supposed to be staying in the hotel at the World Trade Center the night of 9/11, but I ended up not going. I was working for a law firm there, one of these stupid mold litigations, and my little daughter was about to walk, and I called him and said, "Hey, I'm not going to come today. You don't really need me right today." And then of course we woke up in the morning and 9/11 happened. And then the
Wow.
day after, the Justice Department calls, and they said, we've got people in the federal building a half a mile away getting sick, and EPA is testing, GSA is testing, and said, "Oh, you're fine." And so they had me come down, independent evaluation, and then following that, the Justice Department had this huge building of lawyers right across the street from the World Trade Center. They, of course, got plane parts and all that stuff, and so they had to restore it, and they wanted me to monitor, and I wasn't directly responsible. We were tenants in the building, but so in both of those evaluations, it was really interesting. The industrial hygienists for the various parties and governments were sampling the hell out of that stuff and following good engineering and practical indoor air quality procedures. We understood the contamination exposure problems there, and in both cases, and I published something with ASHRAE afterwards, comparing the findings and recommendations of a sampling only approach versus our engineering practical approach. And based on all the testing they did, those really didn't focus on problems or solutions. And in both cases, we identified and helped resolve problems first in the federal workers getting exposed to all those fires, and the contamination were going on for weeks there, and then the huge restoration process for the building right across the street. All the samplers were, we found, first of all, we said, oh, the ducts are clean, and based on testing. So simply, we opened up and got in the ducts. They were full of all that stuff. And then at the end, this was interesting, on clearance, based on the testing, they were finally failing it based on dioxin levels. And so I reviewed that and established that this was actually the normal urban background, particularly New York City, for dioxin, and the restoration practices and conditions were really successful. And for example, all these tests didn't see, but there was all kinds of 9/11 asbestos and smoke behind furniture. I mean, basically, you got to move everything, and so that was a real big deal. And so we were able to establish the difference between testing and not. And a few people picked up on it, but I'd have to say over the last 30 years, practitioners really didn't necessarily learn the lessons from that.
What's the draw to doing so much sampling and testing as opposed to, like you said, crawling through the ductwork? I guess let me ask you that.
So that's very clear. For the industrial hygienists and CIHs, the field starters primarily in industrial, occupational, where there are specific standards and workplace problems require or a heavy emphasis on sampling in comparison to actual standards. And IAQ is a totally different animal. And then as we got cranking in the 90s on IAQ, laboratory business really expanded. I mean, the industrial hygiene lab, medical mycology work was very important, but it became a huge industry of IAQ and environmental testing labs. And then it became a huge business and industry of people doing IAQ investigations, CIHs getting all this IAQ work. And the simplistic, easy approach they follow is do lots of samples and compare to levels, which IAQ really does not have established, accepted health-based standards. And the simple approach takes samples, meet the standards, and predominant practice was sampling and comparing the standards.
Ed, we've got a couple minutes before we have to go to halftime. I want you to, if you would, you had an opportunity to work and collaborate with Marty King. What are your biggest takeaways from working with Marty? And what do you think his biggest takeaways were from working with you?
Oh, he was one of the most impressive and memorable people I work with. And so we started kind of informally talking about water restoration projects. And then I did a real major project with him. We were both experts on the defense side, and huge litigation in California over wildfires, where the homeowners insurance carriers were rejecting all kinds of claims based on CIHs going out and running tests that really were irrelevant, and you didn't meet the magic number in their test, and they rejected all these claims. And so Marty and I did an independent evaluation of these homes with really the assessment based on good restoration practice and analysis based on microscopy work that Marty had developed in interpretation. And so in my mind, he had the best understanding of overall IAQ and mitigation, and he didn't have all these scientific credentials or formal CV on this at all, but I learned the most from him because of who he was and how great he was. And in my case, I fine-tuned our work based on a more systematic approach and the scientific basis and some of the interpretation of it. And one thing was cool. So I guess Marty trusted me. His church had a massive mold problem that had developed from all kinds of moisture stuff. So he had me work for the church, and we figured out and solved his church's IQ problems. But he was a great guy, and one of the most memorable people in my career. And I had some great mentors in this field of the early people, and I didn't know anything when I started. This is I just appreciate the mentoring.
Let's go to halftime here. When we come back with the second half of our interview with Ed Light, we got the Z-Man. He's going to jump in and ask the first question. Go ahead, Grayson. Our association sponsors are the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification, IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry at iicrc.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA's multidisciplinary membership collects, generates, and disseminates information concerning environmental and occupational health hazards in the built environment at EIA-USA.org. The IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry, IICRC.org. The Restoration Industry Association, the oldest and largest nonprofit professional trade association dedicated to providing leadership and promoting best practices through advocacy, standards, and professional qualifications for the restoration industry at restorationindustry.org. Industry sponsors are Particles Plus, feature-rich particle counters and air quality instrumentation. Count on us, particlesplus.com. Tramex Meters, innovation in moisture detection and humidity monitoring systems since 1974 at tramexmeters.com. EMSL Analytical Inc., providing high-quality, full-service laboratory services since 1981. EMSL.com.
Okay. Ed, you've often said that, sampling is frequently unnecessary and even can be misleading. If a consultant walks into a building and immediately starts doing air sampling, what are they missing?
Oh my gosh. An investigation has to start with and include a history of the building, stuff affecting it, work in the building. You have to interview everyone with knowledge in this. This includes the occupants, the operators of the building, folks who have worked with the building, and you have to talk with them directly. You need to do a detailed walkthrough of building conditions and stuff that affects air quality, equipment, activities. You need to kind of follow a scientific process, it's hypotheses of what may be going on. You need to do engineering evaluation in terms of if it's a moisture problem, a real detailed moisture assessment. The mold is a secondary part of that. If you understand and figure out the moisture, the mold is there, and the solutions to mold are just a part of it. You got to deal with the moisture, and with all that, there's, as far as if the sampling would actually be relevant in the case of mold, it's totally irrelevant. It doesn't answer the questions. The basic questions are assessment, efficacy of the work practices, and clearance. In some cases, if there are specific and potentially hazardous pollutants involved, sampling could be important from a health or problem-solving standpoint, but sampling is totally useless unless you have all this other information and establish a sampling strategy which will actually be conclusive and answer some questions. And all kinds, hundreds of cases. I've been in investigations and legal cases where there's parties and opposite parties, and in a vast majority, they start with sampling. They don't even know what's going on, and so that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Thank you.
Ed, you've done your own research projects. Can you kind of give us some idea of when your on the ground findings contradicted the prevailing scientific consensus at the time?
So Chinese drywall is a real good example of that, and actually, I didn't have any commercial consulting projects where I was making money off Chinese drywall, but I found a very interesting problem, and then was working with American Industrial Hygiene Association to establish guidance for assessing and working with Chinese drywall. So kind of on my own nickel, I went down, and I was working in Maryland at the time. We were essentially unaffected, but man, went down to the Gulf states and was given access to all kinds of homes, various conditions, and so did assessments, and then at the time, the scientific people, government people involved, and the practitioners were again doing basic air sampling, and it was really not conclusive at all, both for assessment and clearance and so on. And so I developed the idea of air corrosivity and developed a method where you could measure the overall corrosivity of the air and apply that to impact of Chinese drywall and the efficacy of mitigation of that. And so that method, I worked with a commercial lab. They actually adopted it, and it was sold as a method and procedure and used to some extent around the country to clear homes with Chinese drywall. Meanwhile, the government did put millions into studying this thing and never really understood the basic mechanisms and the chemistry and how to measure that chemistry. And these were all the PhDs and the researchers, and so that's, and I'm just a field guy, a practitioner, and I have a good general science background, and I'm stay very up to date with the literature. I participate in dialogue with the leading researchers, but I'm just a field guy, and that was a case where I came up with stuff that was really successfully identifying and clearing that.
And how did they remediate it? I mean, were they just removing it, or were they trying to chemically change it or modify it or encapsulate it or
So,
something
the
else?
only solution as to the source was to find it and remove it. And so drywall kind of looks like drywall, and so the first problem was identify the exact drywall. So I had a joke at the time that if you get behind the walls and look, if you see a label that says "Good Ruck," then that's Chinese. But and doing the analyzing for oh gosh, I forget the instrument, but there was some key fingerprints if you scan the drywall too. And that's not air sampling. That was real good source identification. And so you have to get rid of the Chinese drywall, and then you have a very typical IIQ process of adsorption and secondary sources. So the stuff's all around, and so various practices to ventilate, treat, and and get rid of those secondary sources. And then, of course, you start whacking away all the contaminated dust, and so there's all kinds of litigation. I didn't participate in the litigation. All kinds of people got rich off it. Abatement companies were making all kinds of money, and some of them were successful in remediating. There's huge settlements and millions available for this, and others weren't. And yeah, so that's.
As a field guy, what's your favorite piece of equipment?
Uh, so as far as equipment, I'll tell you, smoke tubes and moisture meters. Smoke tubes are always informative on a number of things. Moisture meters and sampling equipment for very specialized situations as a secondary thing.
Cliff?
Okay. What do you think is the most underrated IAQ tool?
Well, I just said it, smoke tubes.
Okay, there you go. All right, perfect. Okay.
I'm curious.
And then let's reverse it then. What's the most overrated IAQ tool?
Well, that involves a lot of competition there. Any kind of mold thing, and man, the spore traps, Hermes, and then man, for VOCs, we got tremendous, MC, just very sensitive technology, GCMS, and it's very commonly used, and you get all this data, and then depending on the problems, there are many meters used which aren't in the right detection. So there's many answers to that, but
I'm curious. Go ahead.
Are basically irrelevant.
What about thermal imaging? Did you use that a lot?
Yeah, and so your basic techniques by good restoration and construction people were really the folks I learned the most from in this thermal imaging, and it's a real art to know how to interpret it, where it's useful, and all that. But tracking the moisture, its pathways, sources, dynamics, and thermal imaging can be a real important part of that. But if you don't use it right, you get funny readings that don't necessarily mean something.
I've got a comment. How fast was that deer running when he came through that wall over your left shoulder?
That's my landlady's son. His name is Prince, who is Bambi's dad, but we're not going to go into anything controversial.
Cliff, let me turn it over to you.
Okay. Ed, if you could strike or add a standard remediation or industrial hygiene practice, what would it be?
So, as I've been saying, that real emphasis on you got to ask the right questions. You got to use a systematic procedure where history, interviews, very detailed walkthrough, assessment of potential sources and pathways, and this is understood by some CIHs and IHs, but it's often not done or underemphasized, and that needs to be part and sometimes the procedure to use.
And I think another comment that on the air handling system.
Oh my goodness, that's just a fundamental part. And actually, the way I started my company was the recognition that engineering is critical to the basic understanding and solution of many IAQ problems, and is always a factor. And again, I didn't learn that much from industrial hygienists. Ever since I started in the health department, I partnered with our facilities people, and particularly with the engineers and the operators, and actually understanding HVAC is just key. And a lot of folks out there say they're doing IQ really don't get it.
Well, I noticed too, and I always find this night interesting. You always compliment your partner at Building Dynamics that he was a mechanical contracting or mechanical engineer, right?
Yeah,
And I've always highly recommended to people, if you don't have that kind of background, you've got to partner up with someone that does if you're going to work with this industry.
right. And so IQ is a multidisciplinary problem. And so I've some of the really the key takeaway from that is you almost always need engineering oversight. And in our firm, we were kind of cross-trained. I really understood a lot about HVAC engineering. And then on the health side, actually working with medical professionals, which I did as often as I could on, real health questions. And sometimes the health questions were building related illness. And in a lot of cases, there were other symptoms which had no relation to the environment and needed to be sorted out by proper medical professionals. So multidisciplinary is key to IAQ, and an awful lot of the investigations are done by the engineer, by the IAQ certified person that really lacks the understanding expertise in the areas. And man, when you got into COVID and airborne infection, that truly is a multidisciplinary problem. And when you had just engineers looking at it from their standpoint, they really missed the mark on a lot of stuff.
Flip, let's go to the roundup.
Okay, cool.
Great. The roundup's brought to us by TramexMeters.com. All right, hey Ed, I got a final something I want you to comment on, and that is that your family is now 4 generations of scientists at least, and maybe more. How did your father and your grandfather being scientists affect you and what you ended up doing for your career?
Well, it's interesting, not just scientists, and actually industrial hygienists before there, really was a formal profession. So, so first of all, around 1900, my grandfather came over as a penniless immigrant and somehow got the wherewithal to go to college and get a chemistry degree. And then his job was a plant chemist at the Stanley Tools manufacturing facility. And at that time, if there was occupational exposure or questions, go to the plant chemist. And then my dad went on to get a chemistry degree, and part of his work was again as a plant chemist manufacturer, and they happened to be making instrumentation. So again, as the chemist, industrial hygiene questions would come to him. And then, of course, there's me doing my thing. And I'm very proud. I got 2 daughters. I'm very proud to say that one of my daughters is a planetary scientist. And she was working at NASA till DOGE came, but we don't need to get into that. And so, we're 4th generation, and that's pretty cool.
That's very cool. And I'm assuming that watching your father and your grandfather kind of, gave you some desire to get into that area, and then you went to college in let's see, I know your graduate school was Marshall, but I think you started out in Massachusetts, right?
Yeah, so this is kind of interesting. So I went undergraduate, and there was no such thing as environmental science. And so I took an interest in environmental problems. I created my own interdisciplinary major, which was, all the basic sciences that were relevant and included some work in mainly in water pollution and and I actually wasn't qualified for a degree, but my last year at UMass said, "Well, we're going to have an interdisciplinary degree program." So I got a degree. I got the first degree in environmental science, and then I moved to West Virginia, and Marshall University here in Huntington started one of the first environmental science programs. And I was tired of school. I wanted to get out and do things. I didn't want to go back to college. But the professors there asked me and said, "Come in our program." And so I was actually the first graduate with a master's in the Marshall program. 1976, I got my environmental science master's from them.
Very interesting. Cliff?
Yeah. Ed, none of us are going to live forever. And, hopefully, we're all going to retire and go fishing or play the banjo or, whatever our hobby is and spend time with grandkids and so on and so forth. From the professional perspective, how would you like to be remembered?
Well, I'm really proud of the work I did, and I think I've pioneered and developed approaches to indoor air quality evaluation, and they're in use by some folks, and it'd be I think I'm leaving a legacy of that, and yeah, so I think that would be pretty cool to be remembered for that, and also in my work. I've partnered with and become close friends with people, and I actually most of my friends, weren't professionals or scientists. The folks I work with in building stuff and communities and music. So I like to be remembered as friends and respected among them, and having moved when I was about 20 to West Virginia, I'm very proud now to be a resident and really very much involved in part of the community here, and it's very unique, and I guess I hope to be remembered some. And and huge important thing is I'm dad to two daughters and got passing on to a family.
Good. That's good.
Ed, you're in West Virginia. You mentioned West Virginia a few times, and early on we talked about some of the early work done in West Virginia. I don't think a lot of people give West Virginia the credit that it deserves. A lot of that came out of the coal mining industry, the industrial hygiene, and then focus on making sure that people were safe in coal mines. I wonder if you could comment on that a little bit.
Well, actually, my first 10 years of work were for environmental groups, and I started out even before I moved. I became very interested in the environmental problems of coal mining, and that was the first focus of my work, and became very involved and helped develop. Well, first of all, the first years of my work were right when the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act came out, and so I was very instrumental in the development of regulations and practices in the coal industry. And it wasn't just strip mining, it was just general control of coal mining in general. And I was working with community groups and miners, and I was friends with coal operators, and we tried to push practical, good stuff. And and it's almost spooky now. The coal mining is uh, down, and so much less mining. This was the whole economy and social life of a big part of our state, and but that was really the basis of my initial work.
I don't think a lot of people realize either that NIOSH is pretty heavily represented in West Virginia up there. Have you done work with NIOSH?
Oh, actually, my one of my first mentors was Phil Morey, who was working out of that NIOSH office in Morgantown, and their stuff with coal mining is very important, but also they're involved with IIQ related stuff. And I did some research for them on developing asbestos assessment, and I have to say we've parted in ways on opinion, because they've got a section doing mold, and I have major disagreements in what they're doing.
Cliff, any final questions?
Yeah, let's we have a text question, Ed, that I think would be appropriate. Text question is, how much IAQ pseudoscience are we engaged in with such poor recognition and contributions by the medical complex on the impact of these actors on human physiology? It's kind of a long question, I guess. Want me to repeat it?
That's a very good question, and I've been involved in many cases with health issues, and tried to work with medical professionals or review the findings of medical professionals. And so overall, general practitioners and many specialists really don't understand environmental or occupational exposures well. And I've had very good experiences dealing with environmental occupational physicians, and learned a lot and with them. And we've both concluded that this is a multidisciplinary problem. You need to evaluate the field and field exposures, and the doctor may do a diagnosis, but causation really takes a team effort with experienced industrial hygiene or field investigators partnering with a doctor. Now, on the other hand, there's over recognition. There's a small group of medical practitioners who take unorthodox approaches, and in many cases will blame everything on mold or chemical exposure without a scientific basis, and really going against the overall body of scientific knowledge. And so you got so.
And before we go, is there anything, well, let me get one more question, and hopefully you can stay for an extra minute or two. What were the biggest mistakes we made during COVID?
Oh boy, that's been a major part of my work the last several years. And this was a tremendous opportunity to learn stuff. I mean, it was a horrible thing, but in terms of airborne infection, role of building-related exposures, and potential solutions, there's so much to be learned. And actually, looking back at, I felt that implementation of good infection control procedures, we really could have kept those schools open, and that there was a huge amounts of money spent on control equipment, over ventilation, really excessive sanitizing, and that more targeted use of those when supported by the science. And in my review of how effective were these things, if you look at the epidemiology, and the engineers just really looked at it from their limited perspective, the basic infection control and public health management and very targeted use of ventilation and environmental controls where they're justified is really shown to prevent disease and could control it. And on the other hand, an awful lot of the building control and massive amounts of equipment and expenses put into that really haven't been shown to or proven to really reduce disease. And anyway, that's my opinion. And it's been,
Before we go, is there anything we missed that you'd like to add? And then we're gonna end outro on one of your songs, if you don't mind.
Sure. No, you've asked real good questions. So this is how we close my music programs. And sometimes I give lectures. Like I'm going to give a lecture at the West Virginia Construction Expo next week. And this is how I like to end our stuff. Deep. That's all, folks.
All right, this is Radio Joe saying thanks to this week's guest. And I got a heart emoji coming up here, Ed. Well done. Ed Light, thank you as always. It's always a pleasure chatting with you, and hope you can continue to enjoy your retirement, semi-retirement. I know you're still working a little bit out there, and we look forward to talking again in the future.
Oh, and this is very important, the show you do, and appreciate actually reflecting what the hell I've been doing the past 75 years.
Yeah.
All right, so thanks to this week's guest, Ed Light, my co-host, the Z-Man Cliff Zlotnick, Grayson Gone Fishing Fisher at the controls. Most importantly, our loyal audience and our sponsors. We'll be back in 2 weeks with the next episode of IAQ Radio Plus.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.